Greetings. My name is Guy Dauncey. This is the show Change the World, where I like to invite guests on who share my passion for a beautiful future full of positive visions, positive things happening, and we don't waste too much time moaning and groaning and complaining. My guests today have come all the way on the ferry from Gabriola Island. So we have Faye Weller, community organizer. I'm quoting from their book here, but I'll get to that in a minute, right? Community organizer, homesteader, researcher, artist, PhD in social transformation. You and your partner live on Gabriola with 2 sheep and numerous chickens. Yes. And Mary Wilson, facilitator, researcher, instructional designer, activist, PhD in education, also live on Gabriola, restoring a home, developing a permaculture food forest, and building an engineless catamaran. Indeed. So look, welcome to our show. And the reason I brought you on is because of this little gem of a book you've both published called Changemakers, Embracing Hope, Taking Action, and Transforming the World. Yes. And it's all about the incredible things happening on Gabriola and the other Gulf Islands. That's right. Yes. So where do we begin with this great, wonderful richness of stuff going on in the islands?
Okay, well, we thought we would start with one of the symbols that's in our book that actually is about integrity, and it's about values and actions being aligned.
So we have these images we're going to show during the show, and they'll show up on the screen at some point. There we go, integrity. So
let's go for it.
Cue integrity.
Okay, so I'm going to tell a story about biodiesel and soap related to integrity. So on Gabriola, when we were talking about creating a community bus system, a number of us immediately also started talking about, so what kind of fuel are we going to use to run this? And we all wanted something that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Yes. So value of reducing greenhouse gas emissions leads to action. So we then said, okay, well, what does that look like? And we decided that after looking at a whole pile of options, that the one that made the most sense was to use waste vegetable oil and to create biodiesel out of that.
Waste vegetable oil on the island to run a bus?
Yes, we actually did a study of all the restaurants to find out how much waste vegetable oil there was. We eat a lot of French fries, apparently.
Does the bus's exhaust smells like good French fries?
I wish it did, but it doesn't, unfortunately, no. No, it doesn't. It smells, it's very clear, actually, the final product. So that was kind of aligned, is this idea of not wasting anything, and that means that this waste vegetable oil doesn't get trucked off the island and heading for landfills or who knows where. But there is a byproduct from making the biodiesel, and it's glycerin. So we could have also, at that point, decided, let's turn that into waste, but instead we said, let's find out what we can do with this, and we created soap out of it, liquid soap. So now a lot of people on the island use Glean, the soap that's made out of the glycerin.
And it's sold on the island only, probably?
It's sold on the island, although we are looking at having some in Nanaimo as well.
A lovely fragrance. You've put lavender into it or something?
You can put any fragrance you want. It is an interesting color. It's brown. Wow. And so people...
And how is the making of this done? Is it a business or a cooperative or what?
It's actually part of the energy cooperative. Because the biodiesel is part of the energy cooperative, and so any money that's made from that goes back into the cooperative to actually create more projects and so on.
Is the energy cooperative another of your symbols, or should we go into that right now?
We can go into that right now. It's not another symbol,
Mary, what's your experience with the energy cooperative?
Well, I'm a member of the energy cooperative. I haven't been involved in the founding of it to the extent that Faye has. But I'm really excited about the ideas. You know, someone with a house on the island. I do have a heat pump that came via the energy cooperative, and I'm looking forward to maybe venturing into more solar, more things like that.
So let's pause on heat pump a minute.
Yes.
Most people haven't a clue what a heat pump is or how it works, but I call them solar heat pumps because they're extracting air from outside, which is heated by the sun.
Absolutely.
And turning it into warm air instead of burning gas or oil or firewood.
That's exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe the firewood is an issue with particulates and smoke on the island.
Absolutely, and as it is everywhere. They're kind of like a refrigerator in reverse, right? Yes. They extract hot air and put it into your house instead of extracting warm air from your food and putting it somewhere else.
So you have a local, the energy cooperative is selling and installing heat pumps.
Yes.
And solar?
No, go ahead. Not solar at this point is large projects.
It's
large community projects.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
So.
And the heat pumps one is what they've done is they've bought they've got a dealership, so they buy them at wholesale. It's volunteers. We're volunteers, and so people in the community get them at that wholesale price. Yeah. Plus they give $200 to cover repairs, plus donation to whatever project. Yeah.
Put this in context. What's your population on Gabriola?
About 4,000.
4,000. And so greater. And this one little unit of 4,000, we're going to see more of what you've done, but you've got a heat pump energy cooperative going. If we think about Greater Victoria, which is 400,000, that's like having 400 mini neighborhood groups doing this level of organizing, right?
That's right.
And each of them having 600 heat pumps, right?
Wow.
Because 600 heat pumps out of the 4,000.
600.
680 now. I just
sorry.
found out today. I did some
rising.
digging today. That's right.
That's how you change the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let's go to our next image here.
Okay.
Transformative spaces.
Yeah, and this is where there's more than one story in one space, and that's how often people change their way of understanding what they could potentially do in the world. And so I want to use the Commons as an example for this, because the Commons is a 26-acre piece of land on Gabriola that was bequested to the community. Okay. And it sits right near the village core, and it sits near the school. And there is on the land, I'm going to try and remember all the things that are on the land, because there's Gertie the bus is on the land, has a home. Gertie the bus.
That's the name of the bus, Gertie.
Gabriola, environmentally
responsible
transportation.
Island.
Trans-Island Express. Yeah, something like that. We all got it together.
So for 26 acres, that's a lot of land to have in common. That's wonderful. Yeah.
And there's ecological areas that are being protected. There's agricultural areas. There's community gardens that are there. Yes.
We have big festival
we have big festival that you attended apparently. Yes. There's
a weekly farmers market.
Yeah.
Yes. There's office space for People for a Healthy Community, which is essentially the collaborative social services agency on the island. And there's a labyrinth, and there's a whole whack of different stuff.
So let me ask, how many nonprofits do you sit on, or organizations?
I'm not as active as some people. I have been active in probably 5 or 6. Over maybe more.
How many are you
over
active
time.
With?
It's about 6 or 7.
So how many meetings do you have a week to keep all this stuff going?
About 3 or 4. It's not awful. It's good. It's fun.
Is it mostly retired people, or are you able to get some of the younger working people in as well?
There's a lot more of the younger working people now joining the stuff that's going on. I think that there's a lot of really good energy around things like tiny homes and so on that some of the younger people are working on. So it's quite exciting.
So with this one, Transformative Spaces, because you've got the 26 acres, so that's a space where transformative things can happen.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yes. And it allows people to see a different story. So there's a tool library. The Gabriola Tool Library has a little building there. So
that's another initiative, right?
Another initiative, So people walk by and they go, oh, so I don't need to individually own all my own tools. I could actually come and borrow the tools I need.
So is that run by a cooperative or a collective or a small group?
It's a non-profit.
And there's what, 10 people running that sort of thing?
Non-profit. Yeah,
something like that.
Something like that.
And volunteers that sit there and work on it. So
okay, so what's our next one here? We've got
the next one. This is probably the
Egg of Wisdom.
The Egg of Wisdom. It's one of the more unusual graphics.
Yes.
When we were working on our project, one of the things that we were really interested in, I was really interested in particularly, was how do people actually learn things when they get into these transformative spaces? Yes. And one way that people learn things is they get new information from somewhere. Suddenly, they might get, a piece of information that just strikes them like a thunderbolt. Oh, I don't have to own my own saw. I can borrow it from the tool library, right?
Which is a new thought to most people.
A new thought to most people.
Frankly, most of us men have tool sheds full of all sorts of equipment which we use once a year.
Exactly. And we discovered on the island that many of you are happy to donate them to a tool library, which is its own little issue. But so the Egg of Wisdom, we named this graphic in honor of Anna Bauer, who's a local woman who in 2008 was selling eggs at the community farmers market in her kitchen. In the kitchen where she was making egg thingies, as it happened, and was confronted by a food inspector who told her that she was not able to sell ungraded eggs as part of that. She was buying the eggs in the market, going inside and cooking them, and that was not allowed. Right? Exactly. I think where Anna was a real example of the kind of wisdom that people sometimes bring to a discussion was her realization that actually that can be a safer way of purchasing eggs than purchasing a graded egg that's been raised in a factory farm or laid in a factory farm, right?
Yeah.
So she had this ongoing encounter, went over the whole summer, a slow news season. You probably remember seeing it on the news. Others across, I got a phone call from my friend in New Brunswick saying, what are you guys doing out there? Yes. All about these eggs. And as a result of that, VHI eventually did reverse their policy and allow ungraded eggs to be sold in restaurants and in farmers markets and things like that. Vancouver Island Health Authority.
Who are imposing the rules that you must have this egg this way.
The egg must be stamped, right? So that was, for us, that's an example of somebody's sudden realization that no, it doesn't have to be this way.
Right, so the egg of wisdom is a sort of new insight that comes into our souls and our brains and gives you a...
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, you're walking along and everything seems like this is the way it is. Yes. And suddenly you realize, wait a minute, it doesn't have to be that way. Here's a different way of thinking about it.
So what's our next one here?
Our next one is compassion.
The feet. The feet of compassion.
The feet walking together is really, I think, what we're thinking about with that. And I mean, I think we see that in a number of the initiatives on Gabe. Things even
Gabe is shorthand for Gabriola.
Gabe is shorthand for Gabriola. Yes, on Gabriola. So even things like Anna's egg sales, certainly you could say that it's more compassionate to chickens to live in somebody's small farm on Gabriola than it is to live in a factory farm, right? Part of the motivation for Gertie, the community bus, was certainly the development of efficient transportation, but another part of it was to provide transportation for people who don't necessarily have their own vehicles. Right. For teens who can't necessarily you know, get around very easily. It's a long way up and down.
I think is it Main Island that has the hitchhiking for the whole island, and you stand in a certain spot.
The car stop.
The car stop.
Yeah.
That's right. They found they couldn't afford a bus, so they just did the car stop, and
that's right. And they've actually now got a bus that runs every once in a while, and they use the car stops as the stops.
Do you have a car stop thing equivalent on Gabriola, or
no? Not really. Although I mean, people do hitchhike.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're back on compassion.
Yeah. No, and I mean that's just. One of the things that we notice in community organizing of any kind is that there can often be disagreements. And that's the other place, that's the other place where compassion comes into it, right? Because we found that when people are able to listen compassionately to each other's concerns, most of us want, in general, the same kinds of things. We want that better world, right? Yeah. We're not going out campaigning for a worse world, no matter what position we're taking. So compassion really comes into it there too.
I also notice in running nonprofits that relationships, if you make relationships really number one, so you can tune in to what's going on and otherwise if relationships go wrong and everything else goes wrong.
Exactly. I mean, and you know, and we all at the end of the day live in small communities. Even people in big cities live in small communities within those cities.
And one of the things with a lot of the not-for-profits is they're moving to the non-hierarchical approach to managing, and that means that there's no one with kind of dominating over the others or so on. You work through things with roles, and you work through things together. Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so our next one, moving along, is mindful practices.
Well, mindful practice. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which the things that we do in our everyday life can change the way the cooking, cleaning, thinking about what we wear. I'm always particularly struck by what we wear because the fashion industry is such an environmental devastation, and it's also you know, hugely difficult for people who work in it.
I heard on the radio this morning that people are buying 3 times more clothes now than they did in the 1980s.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Absolutely. Billions of dollars, tremendous pollution.
So Gabe's got some clothing?
Gabriola has various clothing approaches. We've got 2 different, both nonprofits. One, Gyro, the Gabriola Island Recycling Organization, that's been running a second-hand store since 1991, as well as doing a lot of other, recycling work. And the Gabe Shop, which raises money for Island Healthcare. Right. But there's also a lot of informal things, like one of our favorite stories from the book was a story of a clothing swap there, where women bring clothing and swap with each other. And I mean, that's at least as fast as going to the mall for fashion. You get a new set of clothes. Exactly. Go home with something new without causing any further degradation of the environment. all those things are
mindful
mindful
practices. This even goes to the way we invest.
Absolutely.
Includes this.
Exactly.
Does that fit into this piece, or is it a future story?
It certainly can.
It can. Why don't I mention that right now? Because we've started the Community Investment Co-op on Gabriola. So there are about 8 community investment co-ops in BC now. A lot of them just fairly new.
So as background to this, I read recently for all of the RSPs we pay into on Vancouver Island, almost 100% of them are they're invested somewhere elsewhere, not being invested in our local island economies.
That's right, exactly. And so what this allows is for people to put money in. Because of the Securities Commission regulations, we can put only up to $5,000 right now. But we have about, we started in October, and we have about 30 members already who have put quite a bit of money in, and now we've got a call out for young entrepreneurs in the community who have ideas that will...
So you haven't got the investees yet, the places to invest it in?
Not yet. That's going to happen. That's now happening is the idea. So we're looking at what Salt Spring has done, and they've done things like they've invested in a shoe repair and shoemaking company, and
there's a group in Shawnigan doing the Mill Bay area doing similar stuff.
Something similar. So there's some really interesting ideas that can kind of come out of that.
Then you get into risk management and assessment and all that sort of stuff, and how do we not lose money on a really crazy idea, and how do you spot the brilliant ideas?
And how do you? And I know with Salt Spring they've been going for 5 years, and they have had 100% success rate around return on.
Pride myself on knowing this sort of stuff. You islanders keep to yourselves way too much. Why these stories should be in the Times Colonist on the CBC radio.
It's exciting.
And on shows like this.
There you go.
Let's move on. We've got mindful practices, a living net.
So this is about links. This is about how actually that fits very well with what you're talking about, because it's how do these things that we're doing, say, or other people are doing that are changing the world in a local way, kind of move and move and move and move. And so these are the links. So each of us have links to different people, have links to other communities. We're often
bring that knowledge and ideas in.
Yeah, and also spread it out. So for example, the heat pumps idea. On a neighborhood level, I mean, it was just, there was no advertising. It was neighbor to neighbor to neighbor to neighbor. And so that's how the idea got out there and happened.
I believe the electric vehicle initiative, I don't know if you're going to cover that, but Salt Spring has almost the highest density of electric vehicles in Canada. Maybe somewhere in Quebec competes, but that was word of mouth. Have you tried my car sort of thing?
Exactly. That's right, and that word of mouth just travels. I don't think
on an island, you've got no range problems because you're all on an island.
That's right, that's right. Yeah. And then another idea that's connected to the Living Net is that on Bowen Island, they had a kilowatt meter and a thermal imaging camera that was at the public library.
So the kilowatt meter is a little device.
It's a little device that measures what your appliance is actually using in terms of electricity. Your thermal imaging camera, you can actually point it around your house and you can figure out where there's drafts, where there's places that you need to maybe insulate or do something.
Well, those obviously you wouldn't want to buy one because you're using it once but to share it makes...
Yeah, and so she brought that idea over to Gabriola. She moved to Gabriola, and so we've now got that. We've got 2 kilowatts and the thermal imaging camera in Gabriola. And I was talking to someone on Galiano, and now they're talking about maybe putting it in on Galiano. So it's about, Living Net is about how these ideas just carry.
Well, the province with its climate plan should buy 5,000 of them. And every community should be having them.
I would totally agree.
Except the BC Hydro doesn't want us to reduce electricity use because they've got to justify the Site C dam.
We won't get into
that. That's our next topic after Living Net.
Your show is also the Living Net stuff.
The spiral of change.
The spiral of change. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Gertie the bus related to the spiral, because the spiral is, if you've ever been involved in a project, which you have, you know that sometimes it feels really slow at first, and it feels like there's a lot of stuff that you have to kind of work through, and then people start to kind of get on side, and then it starts to speed up and happen. So with Gertie, prior to 2008, people were working on trying to get a bus to the island, and it wasn't happening. 2008, we had a group of people that said, yes, we want to make it happen, and this is at the very, very top of the curve because it took quite a bit longer. We did a study, we went to the BC Transit, we went to our regional district.
It's a boring stage when
it's just... It's a boring, thank you. It's the studies, it's all of that stuff. It's very tedious. And at one point in that whole process, we were told, yes, you're on the list, but on Gabriola Island, you have too many baby boomers, and baby boomers don't like to get out of their cars and get on the bus. So we said, oh, but we're different. Yes, right, we're honest. And so finally in 2013, we said, fine, we're just going to do it. And this is about agency. Yes. This is about the idea of us just saying.
The middle of the spiral when boom, and you're all.
We're actually still partway there. Oh, yes, yeah. Because we bought an old school bus for $5,000, and we bought a couple of older sprinters that we got money from the regional district for, and went on the road. And we still had some naysayers. Right. But. Then it did start to speed up. Then the ridership picked up, and we had volunteer drivers. We have a flag down system.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
So
well, I'm going to
roll along.
Yes.
We have the cross purposes and the wheel.
I'll just tell you really quickly what we were thinking about with cross purposes. Often when you think about cross purposes, you think, oh, arguments and things not working, right? And that sometimes does happen. Yeah. The example that I was thinking of today with cross purposes is People for Healthy Community does something they call a food recovery program on Gabriola. They work in conjunction with our local grocery store, Village Foods, and they take all the produce that would normally just get out at the back, and they recover it in various ways. They divide it up between food that can be used so it's not wasted and going into the waste stream, right? Food that can be used by people that can just be eaten, food that can be eaten by animals, and then food that goes into compost. Right. They've managed to set this up in a way that cooperates. It's cooperative between PHC, the grocery store, and the commons where it happens, and also one of the churches where some of the food is distributed. The cross purposes was, well, some people did already pick up the food at the back of the grocery store, right? So initially there was quite a bit of, a little bit of, because it's like, well, I want that for my chickens, and now you're taking it away.
I've been there and taken that stuff myself.
Exactly, and now there was a little bit of misunderstanding at first. Now it's a stronger program because people understand, oh, you can still take that for your chickens, but you can also make sure that food goes to people who need it.
I'm going to roll right along here to the final one, which is free will.
Free will, but it's actually about agency. It's about just saying
personal agency,
that's
believing you have agency.
Believing that the authority, we don't have to wait for government to do anything. And so when you think about the stories we've told, Gertie and the commons, the food recovery, all of those ones are people just saying, let's just do it. We don't have to wait till government tells us to do it.
So how many initiatives on Gabriola alone do you think that you group of 5,000 people have generated?
Or 4,000 people.
4,000 people. You've got some summer tourists coming in.
Quite a number. I mean, there's...
Are we talking 10 or 50?
Probably in terms of ongoing sort of institutional initiatives. I mean, there's been the village planning initiative. There's been the commons. There's been There are two farmers 50. Markets. Yeah. Gyro, the Gabe shop, Meals on Wheels. Like, there's just so many, right?
Yeah. So you get to live on Gabriola and take this for granted. But I'm looking at this from the outside and thinking of a city of Victoria, which is 100 times the population density, and you've got 50, that would be 50,000 community initiatives in Greater Victoria. And quite frankly, I mean, once it's to do with, on an island it's easier because you're always moving towards the centre and meeting each other.
Somewhat.
It's kind of tougher in the city because you're going in all sorts of different directions. Like when I lived in London, you meet someone, you're never going to see them again. So that's the strength of an island. But how do we replicate the island diversity and intensity of what you're doing and apply it to big cities?
I think what I would say is people need to talk to each other. Although people,
that's a good beginning.
Although people are in fact in big cities, they all live somewhere and they all have somebody living next door.
So Fairfield, Victoria has a tool library in the same way. We have the car share cooperative in Victoria. We have lots of,
There are a lot of small initiatives, and often people involved in one initiative are talking to each other and can say, well, here's another thing over here.
Yes.
And that neighbor effect that leads to somebody saying, well, here's another thing over here. Oh, and the guy that I saw last week at the tool library was talking about something like that too. We should talk to him.
Do people complain they're on too many committees sometimes?
Oh, sure. People are people.
But you make up for it because all those committees being friendships and connections and...
I think that's a big part. part of it. And people can decide, no, I've had enough, right? And then someone else comes on. I think that there's, it works.
So in your book, Changemakers, you cover all these stories.
Yes.
Yes, we do.
And you tie it into a broader philosophy of life, which is partially Buddhist.
Yeah, that's what inspires me. It's not really.
Do you want to speak to that a bit?
Well, the Buddhist part of it for me comes up in the sense of what inspires learning. And the three metaphors that we used for learning come from the Buddhist tradition. The tradition of the sword of wisdom, which we're calling the egg of wisdom, the tradition of compassion, and the tradition of mindful practice, which is basically acting in such a way that you want others to model themselves on you. So that's the Buddhist influence in there.
In the Hindu tradition, we have the 4 kinds of yoga, and the yoga of, I forgot the one of work, the yoga of work. I've forgotten the name of it in Hindu, but there's the physical yoga, the hatha yoga.
The hatha yoga.
But the yoga of work is expressing your sense that the universe is divine through your actions and the work in the world.
And that's the mindful practice. That's where mindful practice comes in.
Right.
So
the unity then of your spiritual practices with the way you express it in the community.
Yeah, I think that's true for people who are Buddhist, and also for people who are non-Buddhist, whether they are of another faith community or not.
So
we express the world that we want to see through what we do in the community.
Do you have a spiritual core or set of beliefs that you bring to all this?
I don't have one particular, but I think what I do believe, and we do talk about this in the book, is the extent to which we're all interconnected.
Right.
And so that is that concept of universality, and whatever we do impacts other people, and so how do we actually all find some ways to be compassionate with each other so that it is about that interconnectedness,
so
I think.
Whatever your preferred metaphor.
Yes, exactly.
In my experience of the world I live in, and in my reading of history, the value sets that we hold in ourselves, like in the 1800s, it was the Methodists who were and the Quakers really leading the drive to stop the slave trade.
Yes, that's right.
So expressing or having that core of values is an important thing, I think.
I think very.
And tying your values to your actions, and that's where integrity is, and that's where we began.
That's a great wrap up. So their book by Faye Weller and Mary Wilson is Changemakers: Embracing Hope, Taking Action and Transforming not just Gabriola but the world. So this has been the show Change the World. My name's Guy Dauncey. One of my contributions to change is this book I've written called Journey to the Future, A Better World is Possible, set in as a novel with characters set in Vancouver in 2032, trying to bring all these stories into life as an actual novel you can read and tuck into bed with. And if you enjoy this kind of thing, tune in next week for more scintillating stuff, and thanks for watching.